let's get this show started. A little bit of housekeeping before we get going with Shannon and Simon. Everybody knows our challenge for the month. It's a gratitude challenge, so 31 days. Hopefully everyone's on that. If you're interested in our humanity expedition to Nicaragua, please let Kathy know. She's keeping that list, and that is to go and support one of our Outlier project members, Pete Shaler, and his nonprofit, Rayo de Sol. So that's our humanity expedition. And we just might have to do a humanity expedition to South Africa and go see Shannon and Simon.
That's great.
The retreat in October is sold out. We will miss everyone who is not going to be there, but we're fired up. We are 55 days away from the retreat and really, really excited. We've got a whole bunch of really cool stuff coming up after this. We've got Hannah Pryor coming up in our author series to talk about her new book, Good Awkward. We've got Mita Malik coming in again. She's phenomenal, and she's got her first book. Then we have a lounge series with Eric Sherman. Eric is an 8-time author, New York Times bestseller. And then we've got Brett Hedigan, 2-time Olympian, 17 years in the NHL, Stanley Cup champ, 13 years as a broadcaster. He's the founder of Heady Gear, and he's married to the Olympic gold medalist figure skater, Kristi Yamaguchi. So Brett is coming up August 29th. Then we have Dr. Talia Moda, who's one of my favorite people on the planet. She is an HIV cure scientist and a professor at NYU in Fordham. That's going to be a really, really interesting discussion. And then I will give you a sneak preview. This isn't coming up immediately, but we've got Daniel Rudiger. Most people know him as Rudy. Coming up. So an absolute legend in Rudy. But today we have two incredible guests. For those of you who may not have been if you're a new member and you haven't been on this call before, let me just tell you the format real quickly. So we do 30 minutes of me asking Shannon and Simon a bunch of questions, and then we open it up for Q&A. If you have a question, just put in the chat, I've got a question. You don't have to put what it is. And then Kathy will let me know. I'll tee you up with Shannon and Simon, and you can ask your questions. So that'll be our last 30 minutes. But I'm incredibly blessed. I wouldn't know these guys without Scott Manthorn. So thank you, Scott, for the introduction. That was years ago. But we've got Shannon Elizabeth. You guys may know her as an actress in Hollywood from movies like American Pie and Love Actually and Scary Movie. She was on That 70s Show and Cuts. She's the founder of the Shannon Elizabeth Foundation. She's a model, pro poker player, Dancing with the Stars contestant, and most importantly, and what we're probably going to focus on today, a conservationist. Simon is born and bred in Cape Town, South Africa. He spearheads the Shannon Elizabeth Foundation. He is an award-winning magazine publisher. He is a huge outdoor enthusiast and has dedicated his life to protecting Africa's wildlife and wild places. So we are incredibly excited to have them. I'm going to take a sip of water, but before I do, I'm going to tell you I have a little bit of PTSD before I take the water sip, because when I met Simon and Shannon years ago in New York City, we were having this small little intimate dinner. So there's like, I don't know, what were there, like 10 of us? So
12.
Very small little dinner. And so Simon's dad, Peter, I think was talking, and we're around the dinner table. I'm sitting across from Shannon, and I take a sip of water, and when you just get that cough in your throat and I could not stop coughing. And I'm like, one of two things is going to happen. I'm either going to throw up on Shannon Elizabeth right here, or I'm going to pass out into the food. Luckily, neither of those things happened. And I eventually, I think Shannon offered me her water, which I did not take. So anyway, I'm a little nervous about sipping the water. All right, Kathy, let's get us started. Thank you to Scott Perlow for the awesome introduction. Simon and Shannon, I'm fired up to have you guys here.
Thank you for having us. We're excited to be here with you guys.
Oh my goodness, this is going to be fun because this is such a different topic for us. And I think that's exciting. You know, the Outlier Project is founded really on thinking outside the box and not, you know, conforming to conventional wisdom and certainly not having kind of one topic all the time. So we bring a very eclectic mix of friends into our world. I have so many questions for you guys, but let's start with, you know, how did conservation and thinking about wildlife and our earth and all of these things, how did that become a passion for both of you? Because I think it was probably a different path.
Yeah. Well, for me, animals have always been my passion. Animals are what I know that I was put on this planet to protect and to heal. So as soon as I did American Pie, it was the first time I was in a position to start giving back and really started looking into what that would look like. And I had a passion for dogs. I always had a lot of dogs. And so to start with what I knew, long story short, ended up starting a dog and cat rescue called Animal Avengers. And that was in Los Angeles. And ran it for over 10 years as that, and then just realized I wanted to help more animals on a bigger scale, and I didn't know what that looked like yet, and really went on this long journey of discovery. And it was a video on Instagram that I saw one night. I was living in New York at the time, and I was getting ready to go out, and something just said, check Instagram. And what I saw was this video of a ranger in the field, and he was scanning what he was seeing, and you hear him say, this poor baby's been out here all night suffering. And you see the trunk of an elephant, and then separated you see the rest of the elephant. And then she started to move, and her mouth moved. And for me, it hit me like a ton of bricks, and it was like she was crying out for help. And that flipped a switch in me. It really did. And that said, I didn't realize that these animals were getting slaughtered the way they were, but while they were still alive. Like, I always just thought, okay, they get killed and then they take the tusks or the horn. But I really didn't have any reference to it. I didn't know anything about it. And as soon as I saw that, it was a game changer for me. I said, I can't, in our lifetime, to know that these animals can go extinct, I can't do nothing. Now that I know that, this is what I'm going to do. And so I put together a crowdfunder to come out to Africa, and through advice from different friends, picked a few nonprofits that I could buy supplies for. And I raised about $30,000 and went to each nonprofit and said, what do you need for $10,000? I can buy you anything you need. And then I brought vet supplies out, and I just wanted to meet people and understand the issues. And I just came out to learn. I talked to a ton of people. I was out here for about a month and a half, 2 months, and I ended up going back to New York, and remember seeing people running across the street late for meetings, and they were like at the crosswalk, and it went, and everybody's on their phone and they're looking down, and they're all like frustrated because they're late for a meeting. And I just kind of realized in that moment that I didn't want to be there anymore. I wanted to come out here where I felt like there were issues that I could really try to grasp and figure out what could I do to help. And it just kind of changed the course of my life. And then, you know, we met, and we can talk about how the charities evolved from there. But yeah, that was kind of the beginning of it for me. I've always had this love of animals, and it led me out here.
Simon, your dad, Peter, is a world-renowned conservationist. So I guess tell us your story.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I had quite an interesting upbringing. As you rightfully said earlier, I'm South African and grew up during a really interesting time in South Africa's history. You know, my first day of high school was the first day that we had mixed schools in South Africa. And so I grew up through this incredible transition, but I was raised in a wonderfully abundant and open and liberal family. And I remember going to all of these amazing game parks as a kid. And I couldn't understand at the time why I could go into these parks, but the moment we went in the front gate, all of my black friends, all of the black kids that I would play with outside of the park couldn't go with me. There was this radical separation. And so I was really indebted to my father, who gave me this very keen sense of understanding right and wrong in the context of how it's played out in the protection of Africa's wilderness. And I knew then that it was wrong. And so I went through high school. I studied in a little town called Stellenbosch, one of South Africa's leading universities. And the more I went through this journey, the more I realized that conservation isn't an ecological problem. It's a human problem. It's a socio-economic problem. And all of these social ills of poverty in communities that are so marginalized and underserved make them rich pickings for poaching syndicates to go in and offer them an easy meal ticket and offer them an easy way out. And because they've been so marginalized and separated from the protection and the value of these wilderness preserves, there is no motivation to protect. So what we found is that to protect wildlife, you first and foremost have to protect people. And it's the interconnection of those two. So I knew this growing up, and then some bizarre twist of fate, I took this detour into advertising and brand strategy. And I made a pretty reasonable living looking after luxury brands and convincing people to buy stuff they don't need. And when Shannon and I started chatting, a mutual friend introduced us and said, look, Shannon's meeting some of the wrong players in conservation. Wouldn't you chat to her and just, network her and introduce her to people? And we met, and suddenly there was this wave of like, why am I convincing people to buy another Maserati or buy another, racing yacht or whatever it might be? Surely these are the same skills to convince people not to buy things, not to buy wildlife products. And what would it look like if I had this conservation upbringing and this deep understanding of consumerism and how branding and how the interaction between people and choices exists? And so that was the path that brought me back into conservation. But you very rightly spoke about my old man as being world renowned, and he is. His nickname in Southern Africa is Gandalf, because he's an incredibly articulate and experienced publisher, and has been at the coalface of telling Africa's stories for many years. Our family started a magazine called Africa Geographic, which at its height was in 140 odd countries around the world. And we don't publish the magazine anymore, but I grew up in this space. So when Shannon and I got together, we dragged the old man out of retirement and dusted him off and put him in front of his typewriter again and said, "Get cracking, mate. You've still got some work to do." And he just fell in love with it, and he loves Shannon to pieces, and we've become quite a solid team at being able to produce content and motivate for our causes in the foundation.
I think one of the things you said there that caught my ear was Shannon was talking to the wrong people in that world. And I think one of the things that is challenging for all of us as a community, like we always want to be learning, is how do we educate ourselves, especially in a world that seems so polarized, such division. And so you wonder, especially with social media, like, who do I listen to? How do I educate myself in the right way? What are your thoughts on how we go about that? Because I think all the subjects that we're going to talk about today are things that we may not really think about on a regular basis.
On that, I think my answer certainly is twofold. On the one side, I think social media and sort of modern consumerism is all based on a lack of time. It's all based on speed. How quickly can I get rich? How quickly can I get information? How quickly will my order arrive? But the things that are most important to us are the things that defy that. And it's our family, love, our careers. Love is built on trust. It takes time. Families, when we talk about sort of second generation, third generation, all of these long relationships, they take time and investment to nurture. And those are the things that we want at our eulogy, right? Is the stuff of you had purpose, you had a family, you understood how to love, and you understood how to be loved. So the things that are really important to us immediately default into a state of being patient. And the second part of my answer is my wife. She's the most inspirational person I know. If you think about coming out of this amazing sort of Hollywood biome that is, it's deeply cutthroat, but it's comfortable. And the US is a very comfortable place to be, challenges notwithstanding. And Shannon had this passion. She had found this purpose. And she had done what we all do when we love something, is that we start to value the amount of time we can give it. And she didn't arrive with this sort of a savior mentality that said, I'm here to save everything. She took her time, and she traveled through Africa on her own dime for months on end, just meeting people and understanding and learning. So I think when we want to impact something that we feel deeply about, the best thing we can do is to take time to learn about it, so that when we speak, we're not speaking in a mode of instant gratification. We're speaking in a mode of purpose and of understanding. And I think when we do that, everything, including social media, becomes a tool. It doesn't become an influence. It becomes a platform. It doesn't become a directive. So, yeah, if you love something, take your time and just enjoy it and immerse yourself in it.
I'd like to add that, this was something that we were coming across a lot when I first came out here. And so we were also saying, well, how can we help to educate people? How can we help somebody that's in Los Angeles know and see the things that we're seeing on the ground here? Because somebody might look great on Facebook, but then we know what's actually happening because we're here. And I think being able to just ask people like us of what's happening, who are these people, do we like them? And we created, specifically for rhinos, we created a website called Rhino Review. And when he says that I was meeting some of the wrong people, there are things like the rhino horn trade and hunting and all of these very polarizing topics around rhino. And it just so happened that I was meeting a whole bunch of people with a very specific agenda, hoping that I could help them push this agenda through that would make them a lot of money.
Yep.
But it wasn't what we consider ethical in our terms of conservation. So that's, and I was only getting one side of it. I wasn't hearing the other side, and I didn't know that at the time. So we created Rhino Review to help explain to people both of these topics, the both sides of topics. Peter did a lot of this research and writing for this, and we know what a great writer he is. So he's really helped put this whole website together, and we're constantly updating the stats and doing work with it. And I mean, Simon's I'll let him tell you about it later, but he started putting an algorithm together and a company together that I think will address exactly this, not just for conservation, but for a lot of different areas. Maybe we could talk about that later, but this is a concern, and I'm glad you asked the question, because how do you know? There's no way to know. And if you're following someone on Facebook or Instagram, of course they're going to make themselves look amazing. They're going to make the work look amazing. But how do you know if what they're actually doing is amazing? And how do you know if the money is getting to the projects and not just going in pockets for salaries? And, there's a lot of questions to ask.
Tell us about Munu.
Munu is a blind black rhino that we have come to adopt. A friend of ours named Brett Barlow had told us about this rhino that he helped to rescue. He kind of stepped in when the need was there, but then he came to us and he's like, I need help. I'm not an NGO. I have rhinos and I understand rhinos, but I don't know how to put this whole thing together. Will you help me? And we went and met Munu, and it's unbelievable because he's the exact opposite of what you would think a black rhino would be. So with a lot of black rhinos, they're very aggressive, and you don't want them to know you're there. You don't want them to hear you or smell you. You kind of just want to be invisible. But because he's blind and he needs to build that trust, you talk to him, you tell him you're there, you make sure he knows that you're around, because otherwise he's just going to hear a noise and he'll be on edge. But once he hears your voice, he hears his name, he literally will get up and walk over to you. He absolutely loves company with people that he knows and trusts. And we just fell in love with him. And so we jumped into this project, and we've built a sanctuary. That's still an ongoing process, but we have rangers that live there, anti-poaching that lives there. We need more housing. We need a lot still, but it's there. And he's got 4 really big camps that we rotate him through. So he always has fresh vegetation to browse on. Where he was before, when we first met him, he had demolished everything there. And the only way he was getting fed was people bringing him food twice a day. So we continued that until we found the piece of land and were able to build him something bigger and better that really resembles as if he was in the wild. So he gets to walk around and get exercise because it's a really big space. And he gets to pick and choose. He's got such a smorgasbord of stuff that he can eat now. And there's people in and out, which he loves. He wants the voices. He wants to know he's not there by himself. And our goal is to bring in some females so that we can allow him to breed, because we've discovered his genetics are beautiful and pristine. He's a very rare subspecies of black rhino, and there's less than 200 left in South Africa. So when they first discovered he was blind, originally the question was, do we put him back in the wild and let nature take its course? Do we put him down, or do we see if there's somebody that wants to help and rescue him? And that's what we've been a part of now.
Yeah, it's been an incredible journey, and one that is arguably quite controversial. And I embrace the controversy around it because it allows us to have conversations like this. One Munu is when he was rescued, he was about 17 years old, and black rhino will live until about 40, 45 years. And when he was rescued, like Shan said, there was this tough discussion. From a conservation perspective, you're looking at the protection of a habitat, you're looking at the protection of an entire ecosystem, millions and millions of acres, and you're not in animal welfare. And he would have gone blind in the wild anyway. He wasn't blinded through human intervention. So it's a natural course for him to perish in the wild. And the moment he was rescued, it crossed this very interesting line to animal welfare and saying, what are we doing to protect him? And something that we're very, very clear about and we're very, very explicit about is that Munu, although it is an animal welfare intervention, he has got deep conservation value. And that natural course of life, would he have died in the veldt, died in the wild? Yes, he would have. And why was he saved? He was saved because there are so few of his species left that we are literally down to, if we can save one, we can save them all. And now we're in a position where we have to intervene. So there was a deep opportunity to breed him and to protect the genetics of his subspecies. And there is also a huge amount that we can learn. I don't know of anywhere else in the world where you can get literally within a couple of feet. I mean, I don't do it often, but there are times when I'm this close to Munu. And that's quite extraordinary to be that close to a wild black rhino that isn't sedated or tranquilized in any way. So the amount that we can learn from him from an academic perspective is extraordinary. And we give him as wild a life as possible so that we can maximize the understanding and maximize his teachings to us in terms of his species and so on. So it's totally hidden off grid. No one knows where we keep him. That's kept a very tight secret. And access to the property, it doesn't exist. He's under 24-hour armed guard. We've got 40-odd cameras on him, 2 control rooms, armed response teams. He's a very, very rare being, sentient being in the middle of a poaching war. And so we've got to do everything we can to protect him and look after him.
And just so you know, the reason, because people are probably asking, why is he blind? Yeah. It's believed that he went blind in one eye through a territorial fight with another big rhino bull, because they're very much loners and they have their territories. And if another bull comes in, they're going to fight. And then they believe that the other eye detached from a protein buildup, trying to compensate for the retina detached. So we like to hope that maybe he sees a little bit of shadow in one eye, but we know the other eye is completely gone. You can see it looks like a glass eye.
I think what is so puzzling to me is I know there's a perceived value in the horn, but I don't understand. And I think probably many people on this call don't understand. I mean, Munu's being protected like the Secret Service would protect a politician. And it seems to my feeble brain like that's insane that type of protection would be needed, because the value in the market is that high for the horn. I don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think of it as like Fort Knox. You have to protect your assets. And I mean, for South Africa, the animals are a huge asset to South Africa. And unfortunately, quite a high price tag has been put on rhino horn. So
well, why do people value it to the degree that they need that type of protection?
So, I mean, a bit of a history to the poaching crisis. When we went through this in the sort of 60s and 70s, and there were various influences from that. At the time, it was traditional Chinese medicine. predominantly out of China. And there was also in Yemen, they were used in ceremonial dagger handles, where the horn was fashioned into the handle of a dagger for all these sort of ceremonial purposes and whatnot. That was largely fixed in no small measure due to the intervention of the US and the Lacey Act. And there was this mandate to China to say, are you going to participate in manufacturing and supply to the West? And if so, there's certain protocols that you need to adhere to. And one of them was signing up to CITES, the convention for the protection in trade,
International trade,
of endangered species. And that was in sort of 73, 74 that they signed up. And 90% of the trade disappeared within a year. So what we saw was that when there was political intervention, where somebody wanted something more than nostalgia to a tradition, we could stop the problem. What's changed it now, though, is that we fast forward 40 odd years. And yes, China is still using a lot of rhino horn in perceived value for solving anything from a common cold through to cancer. But that's minuscule compared to the total global demand now. So 90% of the rhinos that are poached in South Africa travel by air, usually through the Middle East, and land in Vietnam. And from Vietnam, from Hanoi, they then get distributed into Laos, Cambodia, Japan, still into China. Some of it goes to the US, some of it goes to Hong Kong. And so that's the global epicenter. And where it's being used now is that a huge value given to it is that it's given as a gift, as a status symbol. So when you participate in a big business deal, in Asian business culture, it's customary to bestow a gift that symbolizes the value of that relationship. And rhino horn has become a celebrated gift and a measure of status. So they'll gift it, and you can walk into offices in places like Hong Kong, and big business folk will have a couple of horns on their desk. It's one of those.
but it's illegal to trade.
But it's obviously illegal to trade. And the other thing is that people are using it as a hangover cure. So the sort of social elite in Vietnam grind it up and use it as a hangover cure. So it's lost this very sort of nostalgic traditional Chinese medicine reliance in the trade. And it's now seen as something cool. It's seen as something that is going to cure your hangover, and it's seen as a status symbol. So the complexity of what we're dealing with has changed dramatically. And because that demand has increased in size, the value of rhino horn has gone through the roof. So, I mean, it's not there now, but the highest we've known it to trade at is about $125,000 a kilogram. So that is more expensive than platinum, cocaine, gold, silver. It's the most precious commodity on the planet, pound for pound. And you cut off a big rhino horn, say 30 inches. I mean, we did one a year or two back, 33-inch horn that we cut off. That was 10 kilograms. And in your hand, you're holding 10 million US on the black market. So it's extraordinary. But then at the moment, we believe it's dropped to about $40,000 a kilogram.
It's unbelievable. I think with a lot of these things, people will say the right thing, but then they don't get behind it financially, or they don't, they'll say politically the correct thing to say. And I see it in lots of things: global warming, diversity, equity, inclusion, like poaching. Like most people are going to say, it's wrong, we're against it. But I think because they don't see the direct effect on themselves, they don't do much. And that must make fundraising for you guys difficult. How do you get people to understand that the potential extinction of an animal, or any of these things that you guys think about on a regular basis, can affect all of us?
For me, what I've learned is that the syndicates that are the ones that are really behind the illegal poaching here, these are the same syndicates that are the ones that are behind drugs, human trafficking, guns. So if it's all the same syndicates, it's all the same people. Sorry, they're using quite often some of the money they get from the illegal wildlife trade to fund all of their other things that they're doing. So yes, you might not be somebody who will ever go to Africa and meet a rhino, but maybe you've had a father who was in the war, or a brother who's gone to war, or a cousin who died from drugs. So you are affected by it in a very inadvertent, roundabout way, but we're all affected by it. Mm. And I mean, it's number 4 right now, I think, in the
3 or 4, yeah. So the illegal wildlife trade, and I saw one of the comments earlier, a chap referenced it as well. It's in the top 4 illegal trades in the world, and accounts for the conservative estimate is a $23 billion a year enterprise. Recently, the World Bank and United Nations have released a report that suggests that it's almost 10 times that they anticipate that the illegal wildlife trade, when we include the trade in exotic timbers, rare cycads or plants, and you combine it all, it's probably in the region of about 150 billion potentially a year. So it's an extraordinary number in terms of the amount of trade. And like Shannon was saying, how it affects other trades and other syndicate crimes is worth mentioning, because every single American I know holds the issue of national security close to their heart. And when you've got the illegal wildlife trade is one of the easiest modalities for these syndicates to move and trade financially to fund terrorism. So we know that the illegal wildlife trade, in particular elephant ivory and rhino horn, have been used in the facilitation of Boko Haram, ISIS, etc. So these are huge concerns. So it's an issue of national security. We're motivated by the protection of people and planet here on the southern tip of Africa. But people are motivated by national security in the States. And like Shan said as well, the convergence intelligence that's happening at the moment, in the one hand, it's quite exciting, because for a long time, we were trying to get this message across that it's a bit like the Capone theory. You're not going to get him on gangsterism. You're not going to get him on the stuff that, shooting and killing and what have you. But we can nab him on tax. So we can go after him there. So there's all of these sort of interconnectedness. And what we're starting to see is that between the historically, what was sort of quite siloed intelligence approaches are starting to share data and to share information. And we work very closely with Prince William's organization, which is about the mobilizing and the sharing of wildlife trade intelligence. So we work with law enforcement on the ground in South Africa, from community informants all the way through to Interpol and lawmakers in DC. So there is a global sort of accelerated awareness that all of these syndicate crimes are connected and they affect us. So they affect us in the problem. But I think the other point is that they also affect us in solution. If we look at climate change, which you mentioned earlier and at the top of your question, was if we protect rhino as an example, or if we protect elephant as an example, you are protecting enormous amounts of land, tracts of land. That land is the answer to climate change in its ability to, from a carbon sequestration perspective, from a carbon markets perspective, there is huge opportunity for foreign investment and foreign collaboration with landowners, with rural communities who are the custodians of these lands across Africa, across South America, across the subcontinent, where the protection of habitat serves microeconomies in that area, facilitating ecotourism, etc. But carbon markets and the utilization of that land in the fight against climate change becomes of global opportunity and global relevance. So we're united in the problem. We're also united in the potential of the solution.
I have so many more questions for you guys, but we have a ton of people that want to ask you a question. I don't know how we're gonna manage this, but we're gonna give it a shot.
Okay.
So I'm gonna turn it over. Our first question is coming from Teg in Connecticut. Teg, you're up with Shannon and Simon.
Wow, thank you. What a pleasure to meet you guys. And I'm blown away. What an education, and so many things that some things we think we know about and other things just don't. I kind of had a little bit of a preconceived question entering in here. And Simon, Shannon, thank you for introducing us to Simon, or at least me anyway, too. You are so eloquent. You guys are like soulmates. It's amazing. I'm an educator, an athletic director. I love working with kids, and I'm actually really just trying to have impact with kids and actually taking myself out of the educational system. And Simon, you touched on some stuff. I've got an acronym I use, FACTS. F is for family and faith. A is for academics, again, the student athlete, but again, it's about growth mindset and learning. C is for community, which is kind of where I want to get with you guys a little bit, serving others, putting people before yourself. T is for team and family kind of unite. And then S, self, everything kind of begins with that, your self-esteem, your self-worth, those kind of things. Shannon, I noticed that you, growing up, were a tennis player, and it sounds like you were pretty good. You've got the poker playing background as well. So I'm going to assume you've got an innate competitive spirit as well. If you guys were talking to a group of high school students today, I was wondering, how could you talk about that competitive spirit as it relates to your activism and helping community and helping others? And what would you tell young people to help connect them to reach out and find their voice for whatever passion that they can do so that they can serve others as well?
Thank you for the question. I think that it's really important for everybody, be it young people who have the advantage of being young, if they can learn this early, is figuring out what it is you were put on this planet to do. What is your inherent thing inside of you that drives you? And for some people, you were born with a love of animals. That was me. But for other people, they might have a family where their mom was affected by cancer, or my dad, pancreatic cancer. And maybe that's what starts to drive you, and that becomes your passion, is you want to help find a cure to cancer. You want to help support the people who are looking for those cures, but cancer becomes your thing. And I think everybody needs to figure out what their thing is, their give back, and you put everything into it. And if you can find a way to have your job and your passion merge, then you're going to have a really happy life, because what you're doing to support yourself at the same time is your mission on the planet. So I think you will be supported in that mission by the universe. For me, I look at acting as my job, and realizing now it's given me this platform to try to fulfill my mission of helping animals. And we're constantly exploring ways that we can utilize the gifts that we've grown up with and that we were given just as the human beings we are, to best serve in that way. And what I learned coming out here is what Simon already mentioned, is that for conservation in Africa, at least, and I think it's this way everywhere, to help and save animals, you start with the people. It's a socioeconomic problem. So I had no idea of that until I came out here and started learning about it. So a lot of the work that we do is working with communities, and a lot of our vision of getting big pieces of land, it's all about bringing those communities into it, back onto their land. Because for a lot of people here, that was originally their land. So it's bringing them back onto their land. Because right now, the way it stands with a lot of parks around Africa, if you talk to a local person who grew up in a poor neighborhood, they probably have never even been in the parks. They haven't met the animals. They don't know what happens on the other side of the fence. Because in South Africa, everything is fenced. There's no real wild here anymore. And so for them, they just see that as, oh, that's where, people vacation or they hunt or whatever they do over there. But that's no part of their life. And we need to they need to have that as part of their life. You can't love something that you haven't seen or been taught about or know exists. So for them, if they grew up and they were told, kick the dog, yeah, the dog's just a nuisance, kick the dog, they're going to kick the dog for their entire life. So it's changing that narrative.
I think there's a lot of tennis players that are pretty happy that your passion was not tennis, because when you set your mind to something, you seem to accomplish it. We're going to Florida. We're going to Randy.
My question was actually answered. I was curious about Munu's eyesight. So instead of asking a question, I'm just going to make an observation. The way that you two communicate with each other is very interesting. You're very considerate of one another, answering Scott's questions. And when Simon's speaking, Shannon's looking at him very much nicely, and vice versa. And I just wanted to pay you guys a compliment on everything you're doing, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. That's very sweet.
That's really sweet.
Thank you.
I mean, geez, look at this couple. I mean, you'd be looking at each other all day, right? I mean, what else would you do? Frank.
Average, man.
Frank, you're up.
This is a fabulous presentation. Thank you both. My family has a rich history in African wildlife. We worked with Richard Leakey in Kenya for about 10 years in the very early 90s. I'd like you mentioned the and I'm going to be concise. You mentioned that you start with people. I'd like for you to, if you wouldn't mind, elaborate on the interesting conflict between what I would call traditional harvesting. You could call it bushmeat, subsistence, and also the funding that funnels into African wildlife conservation from trophy hunting, which is under such scrutiny right now. And I would love for you to just give a quick summary on that conflict that exists in society in Africa.
I mean, if I can, I think there's really two questions. There's the bushmeat trade that we refer to, which is largely sort of rural and impoverished communities going into protected areas and killing wildlife for sustenance, and trophy hunting. I'll start with the trophy hunting side, and I'll remove my personal opinions of hunting from this, because I think that the diplomacy of your question and respecting your involvement with Africa, I think we need to look at numbers, and I think we need to understand where the value is overstated, and get down to debating the real issues at hand. And I think if we look at it, and I noticed in the comments you were talking about being an enormous funder of wildlife conservation, and I think that that's true. But the bulk of that, as I understand it in the States, I'm talking in the context of the US, was that the Pittman-Robertson Act, which came into being in the early 1900s, was established to curb the extent to which animals were being hunted without regulation. And so there was, I think it's an 11% sales tax on arms and ammunition. And that was set up under the premise of sports hunting. And what happened between the early 1900s to where we are today is that of the total firearms and ammunition sold in the US, only 5% is now attributed to hunters. The rest of them are personal private capacity, and one could make a very controversial statement that school shootings, the ammunition used there, have part contributed to the same tax. So I think when we look at it in that sense, we've got to be careful of isolating an ancillary industry, a supplier industry to the hunting industry, and taking that as a total contribution or a mindset contribution to conservation, which I don't think it is. And if we are to believe some of the lawmakers that we've chatted to in DC, is that we know that Pittman-Robertson is being discussed in terms of saying, well, how is this best serving communities? And I know the likes of the NRA and so on are very much involved in those discussions. So from a US perspective, the funds generated for conservation are kept within the US. Pittman Robertson doesn't support Africa. What supports Africa is the tourism component of what you talk about. I won't use my research numbers. I'll use those of the Professional Hunting Association of South Africa. And if we look at the inbound trophy hunting value to Southern Africa, in a GDP contribution, tourism, which includes trophy hunting, accounts for about 8.9% adjusted of South Africa's GDP. Of that, less than 1% is trophy hunting. If we dig into that further and we say what value of trophy hunting actually goes to communities and or conservation practices outside of the balance sheet of the owner of the land, it's 3%. So you've got a minuscule contribution to any employability within those rural areas. So that's a radically understated contribution. And the reason why I emphasize where those numbers come from is that I think it's a disservice to talk about those contributions purely at a macro level. I know, as much as I'm not a trophy hunter and I never will be, I think that there are organizations, the Cabela family, for example, the big bass fishing family out of the US, are enormous contributors to conservation in Southern Africa. And they are for trophy hunting. They own hunting lands and they're investing in hunting lands, but they do extraordinary conservation work. The only reason why I reference them is that it's not the function of trophy hunting has done that. It's the philanthropy of a family office that has done that, off the profiteering of another industry. So a lot of the time we end up with these examples of trophy hunting contributing so dramatically to conservation. And I think that those numbers are radically overstated. The other consideration is that trophy hunting relies on the wildlife ranching industry in Southern Africa. In South Africa, for example, we're on a Dutch Roman land law system. So if you own the land, you own everything on it, above it, and in it. So when you own a hunting facility, you can purchase an animal, bring it into that ecosystem, release it, and hunt it. So what we're seeing in that is that there's a burgeoning wildlife ranching industry, which is incredibly powerful as a lobbying entity in the country. But what we're seeing is that because we are dropping in wildlife into traditional trophy hunting areas, you're not seeing a maturity in the biodiversity of the lands that are protected under trophy hunting. So yes, there is an extraordinary amount of land that's protected by hunting, but that shouldn't be the single statement. What we should be saying is, how are those areas contributing to the broader biodiversity economy? How are they contributing towards skills development and employability of rural communities that typify the neighbors of these hunting or indeed any conservation area? And ultimately, what are we doing to push what the government here in South Africa has now introduced, called a one welfare policy, that says if we are going to continue to invest in any consumptive practice of wildlife, there must be a provable and scalable association to the socioeconomic challenges that we've spoken about today. And at the moment, there's a standoff between those. So in pockets, yes, there are trophy hunters that contribute to conservation, but the standing statement of trophy hunting contributes to conservation as a holistic industry is radically overstated.
In the bushmeat trade?
The bushmeat trade. So the bushmeat trade is a breeding ground for poachers, because what you've got is young, predominantly men and older men within a village will go into these protected areas. They'll set traps. They'll set the most rudimentary snares to catch various wildlife. They're totally indiscriminate. They'll take what they can get. And so what we're seeing is that there is an impact on the ecological balances within those areas that have been hard hit by the bushmeat trade. And for a long time, that was purely to feed your family. But I'll give you an example. Next to Kruger National Park, which is the largest park in South Africa, and is ground zero of rhino poaching, there is a town that when I first started going to the bush, and it's this little village called Bushbuck Ridge, and there were maybe about 30, 40,000 people that lived in this village outside Kruger National Park. That area has now grown to house almost 3 million people. It's 2.9 million people. It's done that in the space of a generation. So all of a sudden, you've got these deeply marginalized, impoverished communities that historically were going in and taking out an impala or taking out a warthog or whatever they could, they could find to feed their families. But now it's turned into business. And the skill of going into the bush and tracking and trapping and hunting wildlife suddenly becomes a very enviable skill to a poaching syndicate. So now all of a sudden it's saying, oh, when you're in there and you're taking out the warthog, why don't you take out a rhino and I'll give you more money than your entire family has made in the last 20 years. And your kids can go to school. You can put shoes on their feet and your family isn't going to go hungry for a year. It's an extremely difficult proposition to say no. And if you don't, your neighbor will say yes. So this is, it's fed into a system. And again, to Shannon's point, it's why the socioeconomic challenges of the poaching industry, whether it be bushmeat or syndicate, are at the root of this. Anti-poaching guys with big guns shooting poachers is a band-aid, because there's another guy and another guy and another guy that's prepared to lose his life to feed his family.
That is an excellent answer. Thank you.
I want to be respectful of your time. We can either get in one more question, or if you guys have a little bit more time, maybe we can get a couple more in.
Yeah, cool. Go for it. We got loads of time.
Good. All right. Jim House, San Diego, you're up.
Thank you very much, you two. Your backgrounds are amazing. I'm a story guy, and you have such a fascinating collision of stories that you bring together to leverage this good work. You've said so many things, and I invite you to give a short answer to this, if that's possible. But sorry. No, I love the deep answers. I'm just trying to be respectful.
Come on, Simon.
I could go deep. So one of the things, many things you said that struck me early on was that you need to protect the people before you can protect the animals. And growing up in that during the end of the social unrest, the apartheid, if that's still the right word to call it, back then, I'm curious, what are the lingering human we have to save the people or help the people first issues that are contributing to the ongoing crisis of the poaching?
Education and employment. What we've seen is the African National Congress that came into power post 94 at the official death of apartheid have sadly not performed as the great Nelson Mandela would have hoped, I think. And what we've seen is that there's been a reduction just on an education level. In 94, we were much like the UK or the US. Contribution of GDP into education was at about 12.5 to 13%. At the moment, it's just under 2%, and the population has grown 15 million. So we're in this radical shortage of making people employable, and we've got a dwindling economy out there to employ them. And so that's the critical thing, is that I truly believe that everybody wants a tomorrow. And at the moment, tomorrow doesn't mean anything because I'm hungry today. Mm-hmm. And so you've got this ambivalence towards your own future. And the only way that you can have pride or hope or courage in a future is to actually have one. And that's predicated on having an education and the ability to be employed.
Thank you.
We're going to the good concise Colonel in Cape Cod. Scott Heathman, you're up.
Hey, good evening to both of you. Thank you so much for your time today. One of the links that Kathy and Scott sent out to all of us was the Voice for the Voiceless YouTube link, and I got a chance to watch that. And one of the things that you talked about in there was the biggest challenges is that wildlife and humans, animals and humans, if we could figure out a way that they can coexist together, we're going to really make some big ground here. And I was wondering if you could share beyond the work that you're doing, because I got to believe, and I know just from reading up about all the work that you do, you're making a huge impact. Who are the other positive deviants out there, whether it's an organization or a regional government, or heck, even a country, that you would point to and say, that is the model that we should really be looking at, and they are doing it right, and you admire them for that?
I'll say who, but you can elaborate.
Okay.
I'm going to say African parks in Rwanda. Those are the
Yeah.
two things that come to mind for me.
Yeah, I'd throw Kenya in the mix as well.
Yeah, Kenya's up there.
Very quickly, African Parks was started by an ex-ranger from Kruger National Park in South Africa. And now it's grown into an extraordinary organization that major US investors, from the Buffetts to the Waltons, are throwing 9 figures at. Just an extraordinary amount of money going to these organizations like African Parks. And what African Parks has done is that they've worked with governments to say, we'll take on the management of your national park system or parks, and we will upskill local communities to be the rangers and the protectors of that land, and we can sustain it. And they've developed a business model that allows them to do that. And they're now protecting, I think it's just shy of 23 million hectares across the African continent. So what's that, about 50 million hectares, give or take? It's an extraordinary amount of land. Rwanda did an extraordinary...
Wait, before you move on, can I just add to that part of what they do is they take on the park for a period of time. So it might be 20 years, 25 years, and then the understanding is it goes back to them. So they're coming in, they're rehabilitating, they're setting up the whole infrastructure, and then they're giving it back over time when it's ready and self-sustainable. And I think that's quite a big part. So they're not actually buying the land. So all the money that they're raising is going into that infrastructure and the jobs and moving animals back on land where maybe they were all killed, and then lots of security.
Yeah. So that's an extraordinary organization. That Shannon mentioned Rwanda as well, which I think is a great example. So you look at sort of Rwanda, Congo, CAR, just the most heinous history. Interestingly enough, also became a democratic state in '94, the same as South Africa. And what they did there was that they took a very patient approach. They had this sense of pride being instilled in saying that our meal ticket to the world is our wildlife and our wild places. And so they developed this extraordinary culture. To give you an idea, 1 day a week, every week, led by the president himself, the entire country stops, and you walk outside and you pick up trash. To this day, they still do that.
Trash,
so you can drive around Kigali, capital of Rwanda, and you will not see one cigarette butt, one plastic bag, nothing on the street. Cleaner than Cape Town, cleaner than Johannesburg, cleaner than LA, cleaner than New York, cleaner than Alaska.
I believe you're not actually even allowed to fly in with like plastic Ziploc bags. You can't fly in with those. They will take them from you at the airport.
So they developed this incredible pride in protecting their natural surrounds. And so that gave them an opportunity to grow the habitat for the mountain gorilla, which is the backbone of their tourism industry. And that has grown in leaps and bounds. And we've seen major tourism operators investing hundreds of millions of dollars into that area. And where they had poachers before have become the rangers. So the guys that were going out and killing gorilla are now the guys leading you on a conservation tour, saying, I was wrong. Help me fix what we did in the past. And by being here and learning and understanding, you're doing that. Kenya, interesting, and Frank, to our discussion as well, this is an interesting one. Kenya didn't hang about with the debate of, do we trade ivory? Do we stockpile rhino horn? Do we invest into the trophy hunting industry? They said that that debate is counterproductive to our need and the urgency to crack on and create meaningful socioeconomic change. And so what they did was that they said, no more trade in any animal part, forget it. They took literally tens of thousands of tons of rhino horn and ivory, and they burnt and crushed the lot. They said, we will not even have the attraction or the temptation of trading in these illicit goods. And they said, right, we are going to build our tourism economy around leasehold agreements, around community engagement. And although I can tell you now, it ain't perfect, it's a long way from perfect. They've got huge problems, make no mistake, but everybody does. But what they've been able to do is that they've stuck to their guns, and I respect them for that. And in the last 3 years, it's one of the very few, I think one of maybe 3 countries on the African continent that can boast that they are growing their elephant and rhino number, and there hasn't been one reported poaching incident as a result. So when we take economic control of the opportunity for our people, we mitigate the risk of having very underhanded, corrupt dealings in an illicit trade. And when you do that and you commit to it, in less than a generation, you can put your country on an incredible trajectory. And as a result, the world respects Kenya. If you want to go on safari and you walk into most safari operators in the States, they'll say Kenya. It's safe, it's abundant. South Africa, violent, horrible. It impacts it.
And just to add to that, they have the Maasai tribe there that traditionally the Maasai would kill lions. So if a lion came and took one of their sheep or their cows, they would retaliate and go kill the lion. And they have come to an agreement with them to not do that and to do certain compensations. Once a full investigation has been done, if something is taken or lost, if that investigation says, yes, it was done by a lion, they will compensate them so that they don't go retaliate. And that's made a big difference as well.
All right, we're going to go to a speed round here. We've got 3 questions left. We're going to try to get these in as quickly as possible. Paul, we're going to you in Florida. Then we're staying in Florida for you, Alex. And then our chief zoologist, Tom Doherty, is our cleanup hitter. And then Scott Manthorne has something to say.
Cool.
All right, let's go. Paul, Alex, Tom, Scott.
Shannon, Simon, I just want to say thank you so much for the masterclass on being a humanitarian. Shannon, I'm really curious on your thoughts. Like with the Sound of Freedom coming out, there's been a lot of backlash and like insight coming around with Hollywood. And when you span your career from actress, a lot of roles in the limelight, how did you kind of shift from this idea of like instant gratification where everything's all about the now, and then what you're currently doing now where it's like playing the long game? Because I see a lot of people in my generation where they're all about like, the get rich quick, all these type of things. But I feel like delayed gratification is kind of the secret. So I'm curious for you, any insight that you can share.
Can you elaborate on what the backlash for the film is? Because I haven't heard about backlash. I know about the film, but I haven't seen it yet. But I haven't heard what the backlash is to comment.
There's a lot of like people from the industry are like coming out and basically telling people like it's not what it appears to be, kind of like a smoke and mirrors type of thing, where it's just like people are getting more of an insight in terms of how it's kind of a charade. And I feel like that was kind of an interesting aspect.
I mean, it's interesting that they're saying that because I'm actually on a WhatsApp group with some of the investigators that are in the film, that have executive produced that film, that have talked actually on this group about how these are actual stories they've been through, and this is just a small piece of so much more. So I don't know about the backlash, or if the people saying that are educated and they know firsthand. So I don't know that I can comment on that.
I would say that we've allowed society to get to a point that as long as I question your statement, I don't have to accept its truth. I don't have to be grounded in knowledge. I don't have to be grounded in experience. If I just deny your statement, that's good enough. And I think we're in that space. We can, as long as we deny something, it's not real. And you can't make me make it real. And I think that that's what's happening with every major issue. Same is true for another documentary called Bloodlines, which exposed the canned hunting industry. Again, to our chat earlier, Frank, is we just have to deny it. As long as we deny the cruelty is actually happening, we don't need to act on it. And I think it's just pushing accountability aside in favor of apathy.
And I think there's always going to be two sides. So what he's talking about, there's going to be the people that are profiting off of the lion trade and what they're doing. And they're going to be the ones that are coming back saying, this isn't real, this is crap, because it goes against them making money. So there's always going to be the angel and the devil, the good and the bad. And I think that we're seeing a lot more of that now because of social media, because that connects everyone to everyone throughout the world so quickly that I think no matter what, you're going to have backlash. You're going to have haters. You're going to have people trying to stop you, saying you're wrong. But if you have a passion and you have a mission on the planet and you have integrity and you stick by that, it doesn't matter what anyone else says. Because at the end of the day, none of that matters. What matters is what you do on this planet and how you can reflect on your life when it's time for you to pass. And did you live with integrity, and are you happy with what you did? And the rest of it doesn't matter. So I just wouldn't let anything like that stop you from your mission and why you're here.
Unbelievably well said by both of you guys. That was incredible. Alex.
Wow, I concur. Shannon, one of my favorite quotes from one of your movies, Love Actually, was from Sam at the end when he goes, let's get the shit kicked out of us by love. And, Simon, what you said earlier kind of goes to what you just said, Shannon. It's like, at the end of the day, like we all just want to be loved, and we want to know that, we know how to love. And I didn't realize how complex this issue was, to be honest with you. I'm like reading about it like while you're talking, and it's super, super complex. I guess my question is, I have a neighbor. I always it rubbed me the wrong way. Like you go into his house, he has like a zebra rug. He's a hunter. He's a sportsman. I like to fish, but I don't hunt. I don't hunt with a gun or anything like that. That's not my thing. It just always rubbed me the wrong way. Like he thought it was really cool, and I was just like, nah. And like, I didn't make him think that this, like, I thought that this was like a big deal. Like he didn't have rhino heads or anything, but I get that feeling like it would be cool to him or something. And so I guess my question is, like, he's going to Africa later this year, I think, to hunt for like 5 days. Is there anything that I could be saying to him? And what would you wish for, just the sportsman or the hunting industry in general, I guess?
I mean, does he have a dog or a cat by chance?
He does. A beautiful dog. And yes, he does. Yeah.
So we call it speciesism, because what he's doing is saying that some animals are okay to live and because they're cute and furry and I want to have them here. But if I didn't think that, I would cut my dog's head off and hang it on the wall, and that would be okay. Like, there's nothing okay about doing it with any animal. And I had an issue when I came out here, because every lodge you go into, you've got rugs and you've got heads on the wall. And I'm like, I'm here to go on safari to see living animals. So why are there dead animals around? And I think, unfortunately, it's part of a very old tradition that's part of colonialism, I believe. And it's time that it ends. But I think the other question is, what is it you like about hunting? That's what I would ask him. Because some people say, oh, well, it was a chance to go out with my dad and bond. It was bonding time. Great. take some cameras with your dad and go bond with him with taking photos. You don't have to have bloodshed. I think hunters don't really have great explanations of what it is why they like bloodshed and why they want to hunt. And for me, I mean, there's very few people that I have been able to call a friend that I also know have such opposite ethics to mine. Like that's not something I would ever do or condone. And they're just people that I really can't be around, but I want the opportunity to change their mind. And I think it's finding out what it is about hunting that he likes.
Yeah, I mean, I think Shan's hit the nail on the head. It's what motivates you. Is it the experience of being out there with your friends and family, creating memories? And if there had to be a hierarchy, would you rather be out in the African wilderness by yourself and bring back an elephant's head and put it on a wall that only you can see? Or would you rather go to Africa with your dad or your brother or your mom, your sister, and have an incredible experience and be able to take home 1,000 photographs from that? It's the hierarchy of need. I often get people say, the hunting is, well, it's my tradition. But I mean, let's be honest, tradition is just peer pressure from dead people. There's just because someone has a tradition and says, my father did this and his father before him. Okay, great. We've all got to change. We've all got to realize that, there's certain practices in society that are archaic and that are not okay anymore. And we've got to consistently reevaluate society to make sure that we're living in the best possible version of ourselves in relation to each other and the natural world. Electric cars, travel, fossil fuels, the list goes on. Single-use plastics, the works. We've all got to reevaluate what we traditionally believe to be right and our right to participate in these things. And the one thing that I would consider is like Frank and I were chatting earlier, is that when they go to Africa, don't ask questions when you know the answer that you're going to get is the answer that you want. Be brave enough to ask tough questions and be brave enough to go, holy crap, I didn't know I was contributing to that. Don't use this as a hunting trip. Use this as a learning trip. Go out there and try and really understand. Don't find the answers you want to hear. Be a fully functioning adult with thumbs and find the answers that confuse you and that challenge you, and then interrogate them a little bit more.
Yeah, and me coming from, being the softer female here, I would also, because this will be a bit like maybe girly, but I would also like to add that when you look at these animals, I would challenge somebody who hunts to not look at them as just this thing there, but look at the whole herd. If it's elephants, look at the way they interact and how there's a family unit there and they have like emotions. And if you take one elephant out of that herd, it could affect the entire family unit. And I was talking to someone earlier today who, when we were talking, he thought he saw a rat and he freaked out. And I was like, but you know that, like, they're scared. First of all, they're running, they're scared. We're huge next to them. I go, but I also like to think of, especially with animals that I don't particularly want to be around, like a snake. I also like to think, they have families. They have someone waiting for them at home. Maybe they've gone out to hunt and they're expected back. And you start thinking of it in a different way. It's learning about the animal, learning about how they act with each other. I mean, we saw this with wild dogs when we were in Botswana. Somebody was explaining to us what was happening when we were watching this whole interaction with wild dogs. And had I not heard what they were saying, I would have just seen a bunch of dogs running around. But they explained to me, there's a babysitter that stays back with the young ones, and then there's this, and they eat first, and then the babysitter eats last. And it all started to make sense because you're watching that. Now they are wild dogs to me that I'm starting to understand, and not just these like dogs that are in the bush, and I think it matters.
phenomenal. Our cleanup hitter, Tom Doherty, you're up.
Guys, I just want to echo and applaud your efforts and what you're doing. My wife and I became volunteer docents last year at the Oakland Zoo, and we've learned so much. We've learned all the conservation work that the Oakland Zoo is doing around the world. We've learned a lot from the AZA. What the biggest takeaway, I think, is if you can keep getting your education message out there, because what I hear over and over from guests and children is when they visit like our section that has the illegal wildlife trade, when people walk through that exhibit and they come out, the first thing I hear every time, I had no idea that this was happening. I had no idea that this is what goes on. And the other fascinating thing I love to see, and as I'm watching children go through the zoo, they're not on phones, they're not on iPads, they're infatuated with the animals. They want to know the facts and they want to be educated. So I don't have a question other than just keep putting that education out there, because I think if you can get to your conservation or your AZA zoos, we have to pull that stigma away from zoos. People think, oh, concrete enclosure in a cage. That is not what your zoos, your conservation, your AZA zoos are doing today, if you look at the work they're doing.
I mean, I know that not all zoos are created equal, and I love what you're saying, and that your zoo, I don't know the Oakland Zoo really, but that your zoo is different. I think as long as animals have large spaces that mimic what they would have in the wild, that's what they need. Because a lot of people would say, well, you know, the kids would go to the zoo and they needed to learn about the behavior of the bear, but the bear's in a little cage and the bear's pacing back and forth. So how are you learning about bear behavior? Because what you're actually learning is that they're stressed, they're sad, they're angry, they're nervous because they're not in their natural habitat. So anytime I can see that animals are given space to thrive and to socialize, because
I think it's one of the things I'm really proud of at the Oakland Zoo. If you see the California Trail, there are only 8 animals on the California Trail, and they are given a huge amount of space. So the wolves have 3.5 acres, the bears have 5.5 acres, the bison have 13.5 acres to roam free. And the work that they're doing impacts not only here, but they're keeping the genetic code of the bison going clean, and they're actually shipping them back to Yellowstone.
Oh, wow. That's more of a safari park almost, like it's rather than a zoo. You know, I think our image of a zoo from when we were kids is not very good. And unfortunately, there's still a lot of those that exist.
Yeah.
I
think it's like anything, you know, it's know where you're going and understand what you're supporting. You know, where I think that there's no way of justifying it is when you've got animals that are manipulated to be petted, you know, which happens in South Africa massively, where go and walk with the lions and, you know, go and pet a lion cub or a cheetah cub. If ever you see a sign like that, you're being duped, I promise you. But when you've got legitimate organizations like what you're describing, and you've got one of our board members works for WCS, which is massively funded by the Bronx Zoo, which is the bulk of their installations are rescues from illicit trade. So there is a component. You need to really do your homework, and it sounds like you guys are doing some great education work out there.
Yeah, thank you for all you're doing.
Thank you, guys.
If it were not for Scott Manthorne years ago, and if it were not for the fact that I did not throw up on Shannon, today probably would not have happened. So Scott, I know you wanted to say something.
Well, just wanted to bring out my hat to represent, right? And to be an official.
Other side. There it is. There you go.
Nice. Listen, for the 23 that are left here, I just want to say to Simon, Shannon, I love you guys. I miss you. I'm glad the power didn't go out during this time. And I just wanted to comment to everyone on the phone here that what you see in the background is not what they're dealing with in real life. So it's not a perfect environment. Accolades to you for putting your life in jeopardy every day. Accolades for the two of you for being on the front line, in the bush, out of cell coverage, and whatever else you're dealing with. But I hope that you'll ask offline to the entire Outlier group what we can do to help you. This has been a great story. I want the great ask, Simon. So ask either now or ask afterwards through Scott, how can Outliers help you move forward? Love you guys.
So I will say, my wife, I think, is still on. Meg is still on. So my wife and I are going to make $1,000 donation. And we hope that everybody in the Outlier Project, which is hundreds of people all over the world, and hopefully many, many, many more will see this on video, because we do have membership all over that, this just was not a convenient time for them, will give. But is there anything else that we can do to help support you guys?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, any contribution is hugely valuable. Our philosophy is that you're not funding our legacy; we're a conduit for yours.
Also skills.
And apart from any financial contribution, we always need skills. In NGOs struggle to put money into people. You often hear about, oh, you can't have overheads; it must all go to the cause. Well, we need clever business minds to help us grow and to scale what we're doing that we can't afford on an NGO budget. So whatever you do, whether you are a communications specialist, an editor, a lawyer, whatever it is, those skills are valuable to us on a project by project basis. And we would love to chat to the professionals as much as anything else.
And collectively, guys, we probably as a community have 1 million social media followers or more. So get this message out. Talk about some of the takeaways that we got today from Simon and Shannon. I mean, we had some mic drop moments there. Tradition, that quote, oh my God, that was unbelievable. I think Jim dropped that in the chat. That was a total mic drop. So share that stuff, because we need to let people know. And, when people dedicate their lives to something that's this selfless, we really need to do everything we possibly can to support you. Thank you, guys. You went way over time, and I cannot thank you enough.
Thank you.
I appreciate you guys, and we will get the word out through our entire Outlier Project family. And thanks again for being with us. Appreciate it.
And to anybody in the Outlier group is, if you find yourself in South Africa and you want to come and meet a very, very special blind rhino, you are most welcome to come out. We would love to welcome you.
Yeah. Scott, will you be able to put people in touch with us somehow, or is there something that we should share with everyone of ways they can get in touch?
We have, so I think we've got all the information for the foundation. We're going to pass that through our newsletter that goes out. You guys are also for coming on, you're going to get a lifetime membership to the Outlier Project. So you'll be a part of our community now. And, I hope there's a lot of interaction. We have some amazing people. You had mentioned Warren Buffett before, Nicole Buffett, who's his granddaughter, is a part of the Outlier Project. We have some just absolutely amazing people that are a part of our crew here. So hopefully we can do whatever we can to support you guys.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks for the great questions. And sorry I spoke so much.
Guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Man Thorn, appreciate you, brother.
Love you guys. Coming.
Thanks, guys. I saw you both coughing, by the way, and I was going to offer you my water, but wasn't going to work.
Frog in my throat for some reason, constantly, like a frog in my throat.
You guys are equal now.
Yeah,
I know. I didn't feel. I never felt in danger, though. I never felt like anything was going to happen. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Take care.
you.
Bye.
Take care,
Bye.
guys.